Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Chumbawamba. Remember Chumbawamba? Yeah, Chumbawamba. Let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Hey, That's My Bike. On tour now at your local dive bar. It's Hey, That's My Bike. Welcome, everyone, to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we're filmmakers. We act, we get in front of the camera, we get behind the camera, we work in post. Todd's a scorer, a composer. He's been working on many scores now, and they're wonderful. And so, yeah, we do all that as a means of also having some kind of insight or learning, I think, probably more appropriately, from films. And so, generally, this is kind of a more formal process of, for me anyway, discussing what I kind of learned from watching a movie, which isn't to say it's the correct way to watch a movie. Like, just because I have a thought or you have a thought, we're not saying this is definitively what the creator was trying to say or trying to do. We're saying this is what we took away from it. And I think that's a lot of times more valuable than saying ahead of time, knowing what they were trying to do and then interpreting it from that, side. Because just because you intended to convey a meaning doesn't mean that's what you accomplished. Like, you can say you were looking to deconstruct the meaning of God all you want, but if the viewer doesn't walk away with any of that or has any way to even get there, then it's just, fluff. Like, you're just saying things to say them. When in reality, maybe you just made a movie about the Smurfs and you're like, oh yeah, this is totally, a deconstruction of evolution. You're like, I don't know if Papa Smurf really told me any of that, but okay. So I like approaching films from just, what is it saying to me? Not the inside of the director's commentary or whatever. Like, that stuff is really cool and you can learn a lot from that. But the most important part is, what did your art speak to the audience? And that's the avenue we're coming from. Like, what can I tell about this film based on just watching the movie in and of itself? Yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a fine line here, because there's a, you want to make art because it like fulfills something in you, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to do it as honest and real to what you have in your head, as you can, or to what you have in your heart, or whatever reason you're making it. But at the same time, if you're putting it out there for other people to digest, can other people who are coming from a place of not having any thought about this at all still get it? So if you're battling with schizophrenia, or someone who is, you're closer to this. So it's easy to see on a page, I see schizophrenia on the page, or I see it in the edit. I see it, but if someone who doesn't deal with it on a day-to-day basis comes in and watches your film, are they going to get it? Do you care if they get it? Or is what you're making, are you making it completely for yourself, having no need to make sure that everybody gets it, and that's fine too, if that's what you want to do, but you got to know that that's what you're doing at the same time. You're making a film for yourself, or are you making it for yourself to connect with other people? Like, that's a different thing. So how much do you bring the audience with you? And this is the film we're going to do today is a good example of, I don't know, that discussion, maybe. Yeah. I don't understand as much about it as maybe some of our viewers do who have seen it a bunch, because I've never seen this film before.
Ooh, so nice.
Yeah. And when I told my wife that, she still to this day was like, "What? I can't believe it," because she's talked about this movie since I've known her. Wow. So she loves it. We were wanting to watch it together, but it didn't happen this week. But yeah, so it's interesting because it's a give and take. How much do you give to the audience to bring them with you, and how much do you expect from them to go with you? This, you got to kind of find a fine line there.
Absolutely. It's like poetry in that way. I mean, I don't really know or understand poetry, to be, blunt about it, but I heard someone, actually, it's a line.
I disagree with that.
Seth
You do a lot of reading, and I think that you have a great insight into that stuff. But I know that there are people you're talking about. There are people who study it and everything.
And can really talk intelligently about the meaning of it. But it was a line from the Orville. Seth MacFarlane was discussing through his characters' poetry. Someone wrote a poem, and it was very plain on its face. And the character talking to them was like, because this person who wrote the poem just really kept punching her in the face about like, no, just let me have it. Don't spare my feelings. Just tell me how you feel. And she finally was like, well, okay, well, it didn't really ask anything of me. It kind of laid all of itself bare right on its face, and it left me nothing to engage with or to discover. And I feel like art should do that, or poetry, a good poem, art should ask something of the viewer, instead of just spoon feeding everything. And then of course the guy was like, oh my God, I didn't think you. She was like, what? You asked me to be honest. He's like, I asked you to be honest, not take a dump on my heart. And he's like, it's a great little moment, but I think that's true. And I think, that's exactly what you're getting at, is there's a line between over delivering and under delivering, like how much, and that line is for the director usually to answer, like, is this a popcorn movie that you're not really wanting those kind of layers? But if you are wanting those kind of layers, what balance are you trying to strike? How far are you trying to meet the audience, and how far are you asking them to meet you? And it's in that kind of balance that leaves so much room for creating something really fun. Because, Hemingway can sit and write a really good story about a man going out to fish. And by not giving everything up, it leaves so much room for interpretation that the conversation, like you were saying, like becomes so much more interesting and engaging, as opposed to, this guy caught a fish and he seemed really happy about that. Well, it's not a very fun conversation, and therefore kind of a boring read. But if the read is good enough to like keep you thrilled, maybe the conversation isn't that good, but the experience of the story was so good that it doesn't matter. And then, of course, the best ones can do both. Like, it's a great experience and a great conversation.
I would rather any story be confusing than be easy to digest. Like, because I feel like, and we talk about this on this podcast a lot, and I'm just corroborating what you're saying, is that like when we watch a film or we read a book or we listen to music, if I'm pandered to, if I'm handed everything, it makes me feel like you think I'm an idiot. Because I don't know you, you don't know me, so you're giving it all to me. Like, I want to own this. This piece of art that you made, this film that you made, I want it to be my movie.
Wow.
One of the reasons I love Tarantino so much is because his movies belong to me. When I watch Pulp Fiction, it is my movie because it means something to me different than it means to you, because it doesn't give you everything. He makes you, like when you watch Reservoir Dogs, you learn things. He doesn't give things to you. You learn them. And so because of that, I walk away from that movie with my own interpretation. So that movie becomes mine. And so when I tell somebody one of my favorite movies is Reservoir Dogs, I can talk about why. And it might be different than theirs. So then that movie becomes mine and it becomes theirs. It's so much better when you don't spoon feed people, right? When you don't spoon feed the audience. But, you also don't want to go left field and have two things having nothing to do with each other happening at the same time and never come together, at some point. You know what I mean? You have to understand what you want that journey to be. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there. So,
dude, well said. With that in mind, we have a listener request this week from Jeremy. So really excited. What are we covering, man?
We are covering Donnie Darko, which I think came out 98, 99? 2001. Whoa, geez.
Yeah.
Man, I'm dated. Yeah, so if you haven't seen this film, please pause this episode and go watch it. It is streaming on Amazon Prime Video. I think one other place too. But yeah, because we're going to spoil a bunch of stuff and we don't want to ruin anything.
Yeah, we're going deep. We'll do our best to discuss the story and writing, what's it all about, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. After narrowly escaping a bizarre accident, a troubled teenager is plagued by visions of a man in a large rabbit suit who foretells the end of the world. It's written and directed by Richard Kelly. Cinematography by Stephen Poster, featuring Jake Gyllenhaal as Donnie Darko, Maggie Gyllenhaal as Elizabeth Darko, Jena Malone as Gretchen, Mary McDonnell as Rose Darko, Patrick Swayze as Jim Cunningham, and Drew Barrymore as Karen.
So we call them IMGs.
Infant memory generators.
Yeah, so the idea is that you buy these glasses for your infant and they wear them at night when they sleep.
But inside the glasses are these slide photographs, and each photograph is of something peaceful or beautiful, whatever the parents want to put inside.
And what effect do you think that this would have on an infant?
Well, the thing is nobody remembers their infancy, and anyone who says they do is lying, so we think this will help develop memory earlier in life.
Yeah.
And did you stop and think that maybe infants need darkness? That maybe darkness is part of their natural development?
No.
Yeah.
What if the parents like put in pictures of Satan or like dead people, crap like that?
Is that what you'd show your kids?
Well, I mean, didn't your dad, like, stab your mom?
Get out.
So, this is a pretty dense movie. First time watching it, I didn't realize that. That's really cool. Yeah, but you also don't have the benefit of watching it, 20 some odd years ago. So, yeah, what's that experience like? What did you go in knowing or not knowing? And how did it play?
Well, so over the last 20 years, I mean, I've seen like little bits here and there, and I've heard about it. Like one of the things my wife loves about this movie is the idea of tubes, taking you to the next place, like your predestined journey kind of thing. Just the idea of that, right? And the idea of being able to see that, and kind of the conversation. Another clip that could be good is the conversation with the same teacher and Donnie about predestination, or however you want to call it. Because if you can see your journey, you can choose to break that and go somewhere else. But then what you chose to break was your actual journey anyway. So, or does it create a whole new universe, right? Like, it's a interesting conversation. It's what one of the reasons my wife loved this movie for a long time. So I'd seen that. I thought those tubes were going to be more of the story, honestly. And it was just a little bit,
It's a touch,
yeah, which is interesting. It's cool. They don't overdo that, because I feel like that is something you can definitely overdo.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really know much about anything, until it's kind of revealed to you later. Well, you think that it is. I feel like there are a lot of people that argue about this movie a lot.
Yeah.
And
this feels
they
like
have
a
their
great film to just completely contradict whatever anyone says.
Yeah, right? Yeah, like, where did the engine come from? Was that from the plane his mom and his sister were on? I don't know, but then he went back in time. So did the plane go back in time as well? Maybe just a piece of the plane went back in time because they couldn't find the plane. I don't know. I don't have the answers. We can talk about like cinematography and stuff, but story and writing, I guess, like, first off, the acting I think is great. Anytime I get to see Jake Gyllenhaal, especially opposite his sister, is just
So cool.
I didn't know she was in the film. I saw first.
Wow.
I didn't know any of these people were in the film. I didn't know Seth Rogen was in the film, which obviously he was. Patrick Swayze is in the film. I didn't know that either. He has a relatively small role too for how huge he is, and was, especially at the time, like relatively small role. And Drew Barrymore, I was like, that's Drew Barrymore. Oh my God, there are all these people. And I just thought, man, what a cast. I thought the acting was really great. I thought the writing was really great because you and I are having this, going to have this conversation, and we're probably going to be wrong, but we might be right. But we might be right and wrong at the same time. And that's, how do you do that? You know? How do you do that and make the film watchable too? I did feel like it was kind of long, but I watched the director's cut, which is about 15 minutes longer. And I don't know what's longer about it. I was just like, director's cut version. I'm going to watch that.
Interesting.
I have no idea what's longer because I've only seen it one time. So it did feel a little bit long, but I mean, I felt like I was there, the shots felt important and they felt like they were leading you somewhere. Every scene did, I mean, even the scene you showed, it might feel like a throwaway scene because it doesn't really move much forward other than the very end where he makes fun of her dad stabbing her mom. And then we see next, she's really upset. I think in the next scene, she's like really upset and whatever.
They have their first kiss. Yeah.
And what?
They have their first kiss.
And they have their first kiss, right? Yeah, which is super important because he had tried to kiss her earlier, and she said, "I wanted to, feel important," basically, and so it does. Even a scene like that might feel throwaway does lead to something super important and does move the narrative forward. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I was only going to watch a piece of it, and because it was late. But I ended up watching the whole thing because I didn't feel like if I stop it now and pick it up tomorrow, I don't know that I'm going to remember all the nuance, because I feel like there's a lot of nuance from earlier. And there was a lot of times where I thought, is this bunny rabbit Satan? Like, what is going on? Is he really schizophrenic? Like, is this thing? And so I'll just say, like, in the end, I feel like he did travel through time. And I feel like that was an engine from his mom and sister's plane. And he created a new universe, essentially, because I think the book is talking about, what, I don't know if it mentions universes. I think it does. Universe or planes or, dimensions. A new dimension or something like it. Like if a fourth dimension is created, it'll, after a couple of weeks, it'll then collapse on itself in a black hole and destroy the entire, like from what when it shows us the passages from the book, and destroy the entire dimension. Like that's what it says. So, or at least that's what I read. And then, so I feel like that might've been what happened. So the end of the world was like the start of that black hole. And so what was sucked in was him and the piece of the plane, and he ends up back in his bed and the plane falls in. I don't know. But I feel like he did. He did travel through maybe a wormhole. Maybe that's what that was. It looked like when he was sitting in the car with her dead body and he was smiling and looking at the storm, I guess, in the distance. Maybe that was a wormhole or something that he was talking about with his teacher. I don't know. It was a fun journey to go on. I love this kind of stuff. It's super heady and enjoyable. And it's so great to see Drew Barrymore in a role like that. Yeah. Back then, I mean, she was, really standing up for herself. And what? Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I enjoyed it thoroughly. I thought it was fantastic. I'm mad at myself for letting it be 2024, and this is the first time I've watched it, to be honest. So, yeah.
Holy crap!
What about you? Like, is this? You've seen this movie several times, I imagine.
Maybe twice, maybe.
Oh, okay.
I know. I mean, definitely watched it once, and that was a year or two after it came out, and it definitely sticks with you. There's, a handful of moments, but I'd forgotten all the big strokes of how everything unfolds, specifically as it relates to him going back. That the whole loop idea I remembered, but I couldn't quite place one, how and why everyone else is intersecting, right? Because you pointed out, Patrick Swayze as this guy, Jim Cunningham, and Drew Barrymore, as the teacher, Karen, like, and the sparkle motion, all that stuff. I was like, I don't remember how any of that intertwines with him getting killed by a jet engine, and let alone why yeah. And so coming back to it, it was pretty fresh, and going through all those beats again, was really cool. I forgot Jena Malone was in this. Like seeing her in the same film with, the Gyllenhaals, like, was just really cool. Yeah, everyone's really good, really talented, and it's clear right away. Honestly, I think Mary McDonnell is probably the best actor in here. She is doing so much with so little. Like, they give her a very simple line that she could just spit out, but she just fills it with judgment or like so much seething rage and anger. Like, she's doing so much with just her face between the lines that it's pretty masterful work. Yeah, and even saying things like, my son just called me a bitch. It's like, holy crap. Yeah, but everyone is so good, and especially Jake Gyllenhaal. I mean, watching him as probably a 20-year-old have these really nuanced, moments, just cool, and just shows I haven't looked at his, filmography in a while, but I think my impression is he's one of these actors who's never had a breakout movie per se. Like, he's never done his Hunger Games. Like, the closest I can remember off the top of my head, and I might be leaving out some really big significant film here, is like Prince of Persia, which was a total flop. But otherwise, like, what's awesome about his story as an actor is this. Like, he is the indie film titan. Like, he does Donnie Darko, he does Nightcrawler. Like, he does these films that shouldn't necessarily be these mega hits that are just so good. He picks really good material, and not just that, he brings so much to the material. It's not like he just shows up on set. He's really experimenting and testing himself. And it's because of him that a lot of these films pop off. It's not, just him picking a good script. It's both. He picks a great character that has a director with a vision, and then he comes in and he just adds. It's, it's multiplication happening. And that's so cool, because there's not a lot of those kinds of actors. I mean, the closest you probably get is Leonardo DiCaprio, and even he had Titanic. Like, there's just not going to be that many Jake Gyllenhaals out there, and so it's really exciting to just kind of go back to where it all started. I
mean, if you look at his filmography, it's filled with great films. Enemy,
Prisoner,
Brothers, Prisoners. I mean, like, there's so many. Anything he's in is like really good and fun to watch.
And yet not tentpole releases. It's not like they greenlit this saying, "Oh, this is our $150 million movie. Let's make sure we get Gyllenhaal in front of this."
Yeah. No, right. Exactly. He's always picked. I'm just going to corroborate what you said. He's always picked really great films. Even, like, what's the movie that they made? Guilty. They made in like 3 weeks over the pandemic, where the director couldn't even be on set. He had to be over a wall and like talk to each other over a wall. They made it in like 3 weeks, and it's all him. It's just all him. And he's brilliant in it. He's just a fantastic actor, and you don't need to think about believing him. Yeah. That's the other thing. Yeah. It's just there on the screen. You know what I mean? So anyway. So
cool. But I kind of have the same feeling as you, as far as like, I don't know. Like I can give you 1,000 things and they're all going to be wrong. But that's my perspective. Like I spent so much time this morning. Like I feel bad. Like I was hungover all day yesterday and then traveling. I got in late and I had a bad day. My car was dead in the airport parking lot and turned into this.
Still is.
Yeah, it's still there. And so like my brain is completely divorced from my body. Just I didn't sleep well, all that kind of stuff. And so I woke up and I still hadn't watched the movie yet, and I like to watch these things twice. And so I haven't really got a chance to sit and ruminate on it before giving it another watch and picking up things. All that to say, like I'm afraid I'm not bringing my best Wes to the table, but that doesn't mean there's not a lot, that I wasn't thinking about and chewing on. And I'm certainly going to give it the old college try here, but I didn't go to college, so
you don't know what that's like.
I don't know what it is.
Oh, it's literally you just bullshit. That's it. It.
That I know. Okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's gonna be a great episode.
I watching it twice, I didn't even really put together the stuff that you talked about, like the universe collapsing in on itself, which fits perfectly with his comments about the book. Not the philosophy of time travel, but the short story they were reading by Greene, The Destructors. And he makes this comment about, the characters themselves say it, destruction as an act, as a form of creation. And so if the universe is collapsing in on itself, that's because it's creating a new universe. And that fits perfectly in with that concept, and it's built into the story right there. I'll run through some of my character analysis because I think my takeaway watching this the second time was, and I just went back to back, which is actually kind of a cool way to watch it, like because it ends with his death and being taken away in a hearse or maybe an ambulance, I forget, but and then it immediately begins, and you hit start over, and immediately starts with him waking up in the middle of the street, and then riding back home. God. Yeah. And I'll circle back around to that here in a second. But that alone already begins to say, like, he could just be wandering through this as a dead person. Yeah. Anyway, so there's that version. There's all kinds of stuff. But my version was, this was kind of a, not necessarily a deconstruction of God, but an analysis of if God exists, what can we maybe think about and parse, with that in mind, or just asking the question, if God exists, what do we make of death? Yeah. And so with that, let's look at Jim Cunningham and his attitudinal beliefs, is the name of one of his books. Because Jim is a interesting character because he preaches how to change your life and stop living in fear and giving into drugs and premarital sex, right? Sin is what he's kind of framing there. Even though he's not a pastor, he's not a preacher per se, but he is, what do you call that? Evangelizing, in his own way. And he's got his good book that, Kitty, the other teacher and mom, is clutching. The first time we see her, she's clutching that thing in the hallway, watching these kids. And she loves him, right? And so he's preaching this. And whenever he does a seminar at the school, at the behest of Kitty, I'm sure, which is why we see him at the beginning at the school. What does Donnie call him? Donnie calls him the Antichrist. And then it gets him kicked out. Right. And of course, we later find out that this goodwill preacher, so to speak, of his good news is running a pedophile ring, and he's arrested and he's thrown in jail. And then Kitty, right. We meet her. One of our early run-ins with her is after they have that conversation in class about Graham Greene's The Destructors short stories. And then not long after, the school flood, I think, at some point, and they go to the school conference, emergency session, and it's the principal talking to the parents, and she interrupts. Kitty just jumps in, interrupts, right? And she's upset about the short story that Karen, Drew Barrymore's character, had everyone reading in class. And Karen stands up to her and is like, no, the PTA doesn't ban books. That's not your role. And Kitty retorts, the PTA is here to acknowledge that pornography is being taught in our curriculum. Ma'am. Right? And then she goes on to say to Rose, Donnie's mom, that our paths in life must be righteous. And yet, at the end, after Jim Cunningham is exposed, right? After evidence is produced, he's a child abuser. She still defends him, right? She's right there in front of, to the point she abandons her daughter. That's what's happening in that scene. She's literally abandoning her daughter in order to go defend a pedophile. That's wild. And yet, I think the interpretation of that is that it's speaking to the church, maybe specifically the Catholic Church and its followers, because the evidence doesn't really matter. It's just blind faith. Definitely calls to mind Sinead O'Connor, right, who got destroyed in the 90s for calling out the Catholic Church and the Pope. And, it would take years before she was proven right through the Spotlight expose. And so that's a really fascinating thing, for this mom to be abandoning her daughter and asking, and that's why she's there, is she's asking Rose to take over and chaperone this trip for Sparkle Motion. Sometimes I doubt your commitment to Sparkle Motion. It's one of the best lines. That one lives rent-free in my head.
Who is this woman? I've seen her in so many movies. She plays the same character in every movie, and she's amazing because I hate her guts. Yeah. I gotta remind myself when I watch a movie and I hate a character, oh, that's a really good actor.
That's a good actor.
Yeah.
And she's broken. Her voice is broken. She's so distraught over this guy being exposed. So good. Yeah. And so I love that little moment because if you peel back the layers, it's speaking to a lot. Even if you take out like any potential metaphor or allegory, still that character is literally abandoning her child to a pedophile. Like that is the on point discussion right there. Interesting, right? So if we're looking at this as I am, as a film discussing how to interpret life and death, and if one of your solutions is faith, attitudinal beliefs is, I think, kind of a play on God in the Bible, and that character then becoming a representation of religion, then, and if this is what religion is offering you, then can you really divorce Jim Cunningham and his acts from what he's preaching? Therefore, you can't really commit yourself to this ideology. I think that's my takeaway anyway. Again, a thousand words for this portrait of America and this community and specifically Donnie Darko's life. And I'm not saying my word is gospel here. And so, then let's go somewhere else. Let's look at therapy, right? And so we look at Dr. Thurman, and what does she want to do? She wants to medicate Donnie even more and more hypnotherapy, more sessions, more of it all. And it's not giving him anything. The medication, and it's not helping him. He's still waking up in weird places, and she's not giving him any answers. And in fact, in this iteration, she's just trying to push him back towards God. And for this character, maybe she is talking about God, and I think there's a reason they need to have that conversation as it relates to Frank. But we'll come back to that in a second. But I think she's also kind of holding herself as the arbiter of what God is, and trying to pull him into her version of God. Whatever that is, we never really define it precisely. But she has some version of God. She just doesn't say if it's Christian or Hindu or whatever. Cool. Then you have the teacher, Karen, who's really being much more hands-off and is asking questions of the students to think for themselves. You have the one student, who didn't even read the assignment, like, well, if you did, which is really nice for a double reason, right? On the one hand, it's letting her give exposition about what this book is talking about for us, the viewer. But it's also kind of revealing like students are checked out, which is kind of her point towards the end. When she says, as she's getting let go by the principal, we are losing them to apathy, to this prescribed nonsense. And that's speaking to the medication that Donnie is taking, and as well as the way that she's not being given any freedom to run her class. Like, she is forced to teach in a specific way. And the second one teacher didn't like one story that she read, she's getting kicked out. And his response, which is wild, is, I am sorry that you have failed. You can finish out the week. And I think that's speaking to the irresponsibility of administration and educating our kids, that kind of thing. But it's also in a more bigger symbolic way saying that she's still there. She's just handcuffed. Like, we still have teachers. They're still there doing, their job to the best of their ability. They're not locked up. They're not being thrown away the same way Jim Cunningham is, right? That story is told. That story is done. He's gone. We're no longer going to hear anything from him and his belief system. Whereas teachers are still around, but maybe they have less room to talk. Because even I think it's her boyfriend, right? Or her husband, who's having those conversations. And the minute he starts wanting to talk about God, really, he's like, I can't do that. He's like, well, why not? I'll get fired. It's like and so I think that whole little conversation, those brief words with the principal, is alluding to all of that. The fact that, and right or wrong, I'm not saying that is right or wrong. I'm just saying that's, what I think the film is pointing towards. And so let's talk about Frank. Frank, I think, is a representation of God, a physical embodiment of God himself. And I think that's pointed to through the conversations with the therapist when he's under this hypnosis and he starts talking about Frank, and she takes it as a meaning of God. I think she says that in so many words. Is it God? And he's saying under hypnosis, I have to obey him. He saved my life. I have to obey him or I'll be left all alone. I won't be able to figure out what this is all about, to know his master plan. And she's asking, do you mean God's master plan? Do you now believe in God? And she goes on to say, if the sky were suddenly to open up, there would be no law, there would be no rule. There would only be you and your memories, the choices you made and the people you touched. If the world were suddenly to end, there would only be you and him and no one else. Which is referring back to their first conversation that we have with them before he goes into hypnosis, when he's talking about Roberto Sparrow, the grandma death. And she whispers something into his ear that we don't hear. And he reveals it in therapy. And she says, we all die alone. And I might get that phrasing, incorrect, but it's, you're going to die alone. We all die alone. And he's wrestling with that because he tells her, I don't want to die alone. And of course, this is in the aftermath of the engine, being discovered and him escaping death and all that kind of thing. And so friends towards the end of the film go to Roberta Sparrow's, I'm going to get that name right one time, house for answers. That's what he says. It's Halloween. The hour's drawing close. He's got his prophecy of doom. And she knows something. He's been going through this book, and she's the only one that's been able to understand what he's going through. And so he's like, we got to go there. And so they enter the cellar door, which, was mentioned by Karen on her way out the door. And they get jumped by the school bullies, and the guy's got him on the ground. He's got a bigger knife than he had earlier in the film, and he's about to cut Donnie's throat. And this car starts swerving up the road. And he's like, is that the cops? Who is that? Who did you call? And he looks up, Donnie looks up, and he whispers, it's hard to make out actually, but he says, Deus Machina, my savior. He's talking about Frank. And this is also reinforcing the idea that I think Frank is a physical embodiment of God. Because literally he calls him God twice. He calls him a Deus Machina, which literally, is whatever Latin for God of the machine, right? Deus Ex Machina is the normal way you say that. And maybe he says that's, again, kind of hard to make out exactly what he's saying, but it's something like Deus Machina. And then, of course, Savior is also a Messiah, a God figure as well. And so the Frank swerves to miss Roberta going to check the mail to get Donnie's letter, and swerves to miss her and then hits Gretchen, kills her. He gets out, he's freaked out, and Donnie kills him. Donnie kills Frank. Donnie kills God. That's kind of the end point of this whole thing, is he's rejecting the idea that there's any God. And let's kind of pick that apart a little bit, or discuss what the film spits out throughout the film. Because there's so many possible options to the story, interpretations, and all that. Like, there, on the one hand, it could be very, very simple. It's about becoming an adult, going through puberty and destroying childhood, which seems like a big aspect of The Destructors, right? That short story that they're reading, right? It's kids tearing down a 200-year-old building, which on the surface to me sounds like a representation of America, right? That's 200 at that point. You're getting close to the bicentennial. And so you have kids who are growing up and trying to change the world by destroying what came before. And they find money, and it's not about the money. They burn the money. It's about changing the world, and making it whatever they want it to be. Destruction is a form of creation. They just want to see what happens when they tear the world apart. And it's also interesting because I haven't had a chance to actually go and read that whole short story. I know it's only 13 pages. Would have kept me up all night. But I did read kind of a quick synopsis. And at the end of the story, where are you? The wiki says that the homeowner is released by the lorry driver, this guy who's driving this big truck, basically. And he sees the rubble of what his house used to be. And the driver, who effectively is the one who pulls the support away from the side of the house, that finishes collapsing it. And he finds it funny. The driver gets out. He lets the owner out, Mr. Thomas, and he just finds it hilarious. And the owner is upset heavily, but the driver is unable to stop laughing. He just finds it funny. And so we'll hold that in the back of our minds for a moment, because The Destructors, it's never a coincidence when someone invokes a story, because that's usually some type of metaphor that they're trying to drive at or use as an inroad to the story that they're telling, this world of. So, okay, there's that version where I think on the face, it's just a story about growing up, adulthood. You die to your childhood and you become something else. Cool, that works. Because again, those are 15-year-olds, all that stuff in that short story. Or he's always dead, but is searching for God and meaning to his life. Maybe this whole story is him trying to find meaning in life, now that he's dead. And if God controls time, then everything is pre-decided. This is one of those conversations that he's having with his teacher. If we were able to, and his teacher rebuts, right? If we were able to see our destinies manifested visually, then we would be given the choice to betray our chosen destinies. And Donnie's like, no, not if you travel within God's channel. And God's channel, I think, would be a representation of his faith, his belief system, Christianity or whatever version of God that you necessarily, choose to go with. Maybe like that's interesting. It's him trying to change his destiny by playing along or something. Or another option, I think, is he chooses to die at the end, or simply accepts that should be his fate. And that's something that is kind of echoed with Gretchen's character. At the end, we hear her repeat something she said earlier in the film. What if you could go back in time and take all those memories and darkness and replace them with something better? And so it's him kind of going through life and replacing darkness with good things, which we'll take a look at here in a minute. It's also interesting because if there's two versions of this world, maybe one where he doesn't die under the jet engine and one where he does. And if this version where he lives is reality, well, is life actually better without him? If all these other bad things happen, his mom and his sister die, they only die because the pedophile was exposed. Otherwise, they would not be on that plane. And so people who say that this is a loop, I don't think that holds up. Because if that one thing changes, that Donnie dies at the beginning, that's a different person on that plane. Maybe his sister still dies, but the mother does not. Or maybe something else happens. I don't know, but that's a different loop.
That might kill Sparkle Motion.
That might kill Sparkle Motion once and for all.
Just saying.
Or what if accepting his death is a natural process to life, right? Because it's all absurd anyway, which for me calls to a number of things. IMG, right? The infant memory generator, that clip we played, right? That class project that they're presenting in front of everyone. The idea was you place pictures when infants sleep to help them develop memories earlier in life, to get them going. And what he says is, I think, also important, because he's like, no one remembers anyway. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. No one remembers anyway. Death doesn't matter. No one remembers death anyway. You can't remember something you're sleeping through or not conscious or aware of. But the rebuttal from the teacher is really good. He says, did you stop and think maybe infants need darkness? That maybe darkness is part of their natural development. Maybe death is a natural part of our process, and it's not something to wish away or to insert these fake images in front of anyway. Because if you imagine that whole conversation being about death, then what their images represent is a fake reality, the afterlife, God. All that's just made up, bullshit to make ourselves feel better about what we're feeding children, which is that life sometimes is dark. That's just the nature, and that's the reality, and you have to accept it in order to get through this thing. I think that's probably closer to what I think this version of the film is discussing, because they also put a really nice button on that scene, which is when the little snarky bully in the back raises his hand and says, what if you put in pictures of Satan, dead people, crap like that? You know what she says? Is that what you'd show your kids? Now, this is a common refrain whenever you're having conversations, between someone who's religious and not, is this question of why, if we have a creator, do bad things happen? And this is, I think, a really nice rebuttal to the idea of saying, would you do those things to your kids if you could control their reality, if you could control what happens in front of their eyes? Would you give them Satan? Would you give them the dead and the deceased and everything that's negative? Like, if you were God, is that how you would treat your creation? I mean, maybe, I don't know. We're not God. But that's not how you would treat your kid, or at least no one who would treat their kid that way would be worthy of being a parent. Mm-hmm. And so there's 100%. A lot of philosophical implications to time travel, right? To this idea of God being the one who's controlling time and destiny and all these things. Like, I think that's all interplaying together. And that's, I think, why it's called the philosophy of time travel. So that's a really nice thing. I find it very interesting and compelling as a, I guess, agnostic person myself who was formerly heavily religious. Don't get me started. Go listen to our, the Sunset Limited episode, and you can hear all about that. And so, and then you finally, towards the end, hear the letter that he wrote to Roberta Sparrows, which is him saying to her over this montage of faces. He says, "I can only hope when the world ends that I can breathe a sigh of relief because there will be so much to look forward to." And I think that's kind of him committing to the idea of it's better, yet despite knowing all this, it's still better to believe than not to believe. It gives you something to look forward to. And that's when we cut to Donnie in bed. We don't see what he's looking at. We only see him laughing uncontrollably and then drifting off to sleep peacefully to his death. He's accepting it. He's accepting the darkness and thinking that the world would be better. And that is where you can start the loop, because then if you start the film over, at the start of the film, he wakes up, he breathes a sigh of relief. That's what he says. "I can only hope when the world ends, I can breathe a sigh of relief." And that's what he does. At the start of the film, he kind of looks down, laughs to himself. I take that as his, sigh of relief. And then he goes on to experience so many things, so many wonderful things. Right? He gets picked by the new girl as the cutest boy in class. He floods the school and gets a day off where he gets to meet the cute girl on the way home from school. He has a great first kiss, right? With Gretchen that affirms that life can be good. That was what she was holding out for.
Mm-hmm.
Comes on the heels of her trauma being shouted out in front of the whole class. I need that moment now. Please. Thank you. Yes. Boom. Beautiful moment. Just swirling around. It's so good. And then he also burns down the house of a child abuser, predator.
And he is happy when he does it.
He is. That's a good day. This is a good thing.
Before he even knew,
Before he knew. He just knew that he knew. He knew, but that's what he's telling Gretchen in the woods thing that they set up. He's like, "This guy's a liar. Everything he says is a lie." And he calls him the Antichrist. Like, he's so passionate. He just knows. He doesn't know what the lie is necessarily. He just knows this guy is not good. And it doesn't shock him one iota when what's revealed is revealed. And he stands up for Sharita, right? The Asian girl, right? That at the beginning of after the next day after he escapes death at the bus stop, he even stands up to her with his friends, like, "Hey, leave her alone." And at the end, he's like, "Things are going to get better." So cool. So many good things happen, but so many bad things. And so that maybe, okay, I got a lot of good things out of this, but maybe so many other people will get better things than my little experience. And so becomes this really satisfying, interesting loop to participate in. I don't know. That's kind of my takeaway, for better or worse, but there's some really beautiful things in there, I think. Yeah.
So do you think that the entire thing could have just been like his life flashing before his eyes, and he never actually left his bed, and this all happened at the same moment?
Yeah. And I think that because whenever he finally meets Gretchen, her backstory is kind of wild. She's under witness protection because her dad is some kind of killer. Maybe he stabbed her mom, and the actual key point out of that whole backstory, I feel like that's a thing to get him to have a reason for her to pick her own name. He doesn't know what her real name is. Gretchen is the name she gave herself. And I think that's because he saw her around but never met her, therefore didn't know her actual name. And him wanting Jim Cunningham to be this child predator because he's like, "This guy, I don't know what his deal is, but it's dark. This guy is dark, and I can't prove it, but it is what it is." And so he created this whole backstory for them. And maybe he wanted to apologize to his mom for calling her a bitch by saving her life and replacing her with the plane. Because in the dark version, he kills his mom basically by not dying. And therefore, by accepting his fate, he gets to save her life. I don't know. I think it plays, and again, that's so cool about this movie because who knows? Yeah, but that's kind of my mini layers of thought. But I do think it is kind of this approach to inspecting faith and death and what it all means to you, what it all means to Richard Kelly, maybe. Yeah.
I think it's a good example of probably him having an idea of this is what it means to me. And I'm going to make, like kind of what we were talking about at the beginning, I'm going to make this in a way that I see the meaning. I'm going to make it so that I see the meaning, but I'm going to make it in a way that everybody else can see their own. You know, so I'm not going to give you the answer of whether or not this is a moment that he reverts back to. So it is the only moment that exists is the moment when the engine falls in his room. Even though maybe in his mind he knows that answer, you know, to him, but he's never going to tell it or say it because then it would take the movie away from everybody who thinks, no, this actually did happen and he did time travel and, you know, and all that stuff. Like, I mean, have you ever had a dream where you feel like hours pass or just so much time passes, but you wake up and it's been 5 minutes of you having a nap, you know? Like, you know, and that's, you know, goes into like Inception territory, I know, but the point being, this could be, the whole thing could have been a dream. You know, we don't really see him traveling to the therapist, you know, or from the therapist. You know, we see his parents there at one point, but we don't see them going there. We just see them there. And, you know, that might be, to your point, him recognizing the love that his parents have for him, you know, because they really, like, the mother really is upset, like really cares and just wants him to be happy and like have a good life, you know, and he ends up having a decent relationship with his sister, you know, which they hate each other at the beginning before the plane scenario. But then, you know, he, at one point, she's asleep after the party. And he does something. What does he do? He like pets her or something, or he touches her or something. That might have been
in the director's cut. I don't remember that scene.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a moment where he has with her where she's asleep after the party. Oh, wow. Because they, you know, they're getting along, I guess is my point, is that they're actually getting along during this whole scenario. So, or not, maybe not the whole thing, but some of it. Yeah. So it's just really interesting that anybody can have their own version of it, and it's not wrong. You know, it's cool.
Not at all. Yeah, I love it. I think, you know, you can kind of keep doing that, like placing little buttons here and there and saying, oh, this ties to this. I mean, even the Smurf conversation speaks to all of this, actually. Like they're having this silly, funny punchline of a conversation about the Smurfs and Smurfette and like having sex with her, and she's there to please all the guys, and he refutes all of that by saying, you know, actually she was supposed to be evil, but she gets turned by the goodness of the Smurf way of life, and it transforms her. And then he starts kind of pondering like the pointlessness of being a Smurf in the first place. He's like, why even live if you can't have sex? Like if you can't, you know, enjoy it. And so I think that kind of still speaks to this idea of him envisioning all these things he didn't get to have and enjoy. And that's just adding, again, so many nice little layers, because that scene is also there to reinforce him as an intelligent thinker, you know?
But then he actually gets it.
Yeah.
He actually gets to have sex.
Yep.
Like, so
exactly.
Of course this is a dream, because he gets everything, like everything that he could want, he gets.
Yeah.
You know, so you look at it, is it God guiding you to get what you want? I don't see it that way at all.
Yeah.
At all. I see it his own version of a good reality, the best version of reality. He's giving himself in his final moment.
Yeah.
You know, which is, I catch the pedophile that I knew was bullshit in the beginning. You know, I'm going to save my mom. I'm going to make right with my sister. I'm going to get to have sex for the first time and meet the girl who chose me, by the way, which guys want.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, she chose him. She sat next to him. I'm going to find the teacher. Like, I'm going to have good teachers that get me and that I can communicate with, which is super important. Yeah. Anyway.
And he's going to get to choose to die.
Yes.
Right? Because that's a part of the whole conversation of God controlling and being predestined and then killing God. If you kill God, then you get to choose to die.
Yeah.
That becomes an active participant in your destination instead of someone who's just being forced. All of that plays. Yeah. So that's cool stuff, man. Yeah. I don't know. I'm sure someone will come along and, this has a pretty passionate fan base. And so who knows, the other layers that we're missing or not thinking about, but I have no doubt there's several other philosophies and thoughts of Donnie Darko time travel.
Yeah. Please let us know what you think.
Yeah.
This is what we think. This is my thought on first viewing. So if I view it again, I might have some other, maybe we'll circle around to this in like episode 400 or something and rewatch it. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So much fun. Nice. What are you going to recommend this week?
Something completely different, left of center. Had nothing to do with this film at all. Just a film I watched this week because I was talking to my son. We were saying, you know what, we need some other movie marathon kind of like thing, because we did all the Marvels and we did all the a bunch of we've done like Back to the Futures and all that stuff, and then I was just looking up some movies and I spotted School of Rock, which is to watch with an 11 and an 8-year-old. A 24-year-old movie or whatever it is, 22-year-old movie. I think it was 2003. It was a lot of fun, and Jack Black is great in it, and it's corny and dumb, but they were laughing. The kids were laughing. It was just a great experience. And it's if you're not looking for substance, if you're just looking for a popcorn movie, especially if you've got little ones, it's wholesome and fun, and it's great because the kids actually play. They actually play the music in a lot of the scenes, so which I didn't remember honestly. But yeah, so School of Rock.
Nice. I was split because part of me wanted to recommend It's a Wonderful Life because this feels in some ways like an inverted version of that story where he's taking a tour of his life and seeing that maybe everyone's better off without him. But instead, I just finished this book. It's kind of a wild ride. It's called Bunny. I don't know how to pronounce the author's name, Mona Awad. And it's absurdist and has some really thoughtful ideas. It's incredibly well written. Yeah, it's more akin to like Heathers. So if you enjoyed Heathers, the movie, this is very much playing in that same universe, or I don't know, style. And so, yeah, if you're a reader, check that out. I'm sure it'll probably be adapted at some point in the future, and I'm sure that'll probably be about as good as the book. It's a fun, interesting read, and it goes some wild places. And that's about all I got for that. Yeah, stay tuned for next week. We're gonna take a look. It's interesting that they went to watch The Evil Dead at the movie theater in Donnie Darko, because next week we're going to take a look at Evil Dead 2. So the kind of remake / sequel of Evil Dead, The Evil Dead. And so Evil Dead 2, I don't know if it's streaming anywhere. You might have to rent it if you haven't already seen it. But I don't know, maybe worth it, maybe not. We'll find out, in a couple days. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, subscribe, drop us a review, leave us a note of what you would like us to talk about, the kind of things you find interesting. Shout out to Jeremy, who requested this episode. Thank you, sir, because I had been debating. Like, this has been on my list for a while, and I was like, that's a pretty intimidating film. And it probably was going to take someone requesting for us to actually do it, because there's a lot going on in here under the hood. And that always is like, especially with having a cult following, that makes me feel very on the outside looking in, like I'm walking into a room full of people and they all stop and look at me. And I'm like, oh, Todd, let's go, man. But I think we did okay, man. I think we did all right. So appreciate the request, Jeremy. And if you want to comment on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/Donnie Darko.
And our quote of the day is from Greene. If you have abandoned one faith, do not abandon all faith. There is always an alternative to the faith we lose. Or is it the same faith under another mask?
Yeah. I feel like that's speaking to this film in a lot of ways, as just comparing medication to religion to whatever, atheism. Like, is it really all that different? At the end of the day, you're kind of just telling yourself the story that you want. I mean, I'm agnostic, and that's me telling myself the story that I want. It's not because I have proof that there may or may not be something out there, right?
Right. It just makes you feel better.
Just makes
to
me
know
feel
that there's
better.
To know that there's not.
To know
who's
that
allowing things to happen.
That there may or may not be. Like, that's me being agnostic. Like, I don't know. That's me shrugging. Like, maybe there's something there. Maybe there's not. I don't know. That makes me feel better to say that, yeah, it's possible. But also maybe it's not possible. It all accomplishes the same thing, which is to help us move through life. And I think that's this movie in a nutshell.
Help! I'm in this nutshell. Sorry. I got nothing to add to that. I think it's a great way to end it. Thank you so much for joining us. I had a great time. Wes, as always, incredible insight into this. I think you did a great job covering it, honestly, because it's a beast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Please subscribe, review us where you get all your podcasts. It all helps a lot, and share us with your friends. Really, it matters. And thank you again for the recommendation. If there's another film anybody would like to see us pick apart, who knows? Maybe we'll do it. Make a recommendation, and we'll see if we can fit it in. Until next time, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.